Good morning. It is early in the morning my time. The VOW Season 2, Episode 1 dropped last night, very late. I'm going to do a debrief on the episode. A couple of things that are important. Spoiler alerts, if you don't know much about this particular trial case situation, don't listen to this yet until you've seen the episode. I probably will spoil some things. The other thing I want to say is thank you to all the people that sent amazing messages on social media. So much support, so much love, so much care. Incredible. Thank you so much. Also, at some point during the next 6 weeks, while the episodes drop once per week, I'll be doing something with a little bit Culty, Sarah Edmondson and Nippy Ames over on their Patreon. So you might want to listen to that. Also, give a little bit Culty a follow and listen to what they're doing. It's incredible. If you know people that are non-English speakers that want to listen to what I'm saying in another language, you can send them over to YouTube. I post these episodes a few days later on YouTube. They have captions. They can translate it into any language they choose. So let them know. And also, please subscribe to this podcast. Subscribe. I have a lot of things I want to talk about, and some of it I think might be valuable. All right, let's launch in. What was it like watching episode 1? First of all, somebody said to me, is it triggering still? To some degree, it is, but we have distance now. There's been a lot of time that has passed. Some of it is, some of it not so much, but it's not as, certainly as triggering as season 1. That was super hard. I think the thing that comes up is I have a lot of emotions about the people that I haven't seen for some time that appear in the show. I have a lot of complex emotions. You know, when I see the people that are still loyal to Raniere, it's interesting. I want people to understand how they might see us. You know, because it's easy to say, oh, they're just crazy, delusional, whatever. That's easy. But like the way they see us, those of us who spoke out, because of the Nixium tech, because of what they've been taught and what they're still holding on to, they see us as weak-willed people, as dishonorable. They believe that we're just made shit up, that we're lying. They believe that we didn't have what it took to be really strong and really noble and really principled. They believe, some of them believe that we broke our vows. You know, they believe that we made lifelong vows that we broke. Some of them think that, you know, we're just disintegrated or suppressive. So there's a whole framework through which they're seeing us, and I sort of try to remember that as I'm watching them on screen, that their ideology makes perfect sense to them. One of the things that is very painful watching the VOW anytime, and certainly I experienced that at the very beginning, the sort of intro of episode 1, is seeing the good times. The good times really hurt. It really hurts to see the good times because we were sold a lie. And there was a kind of utopian paradise feeling that we were experiencing. And I think many people that are still loyal to Raniere are still holding on to that. Our hopes got dashed in many ways, and I don't see it the same way, but I do remember those times, and it's very painful watching that. I have so many mixed feelings watching Nancy Salzman. Nancy Salzman was, you know, the CEO of the corporation, but also she, and I said this at one point in, if you listen to my episode about Letter to the Inside, you know, I mentioned at one point there, I think it's in part 2 that's coming up still, that she was the conscience of the organization. So she's embedded in our psyches, you know. So watching some of the stuff, you know, from the modules, the videos, it's disturbing. It sort of takes me back to that time again, which in some ways feels far, far away, but those things are still, chips of those things, you know, little fragments of those things are still in my psyche, you know, that I'm still working out bit by bit. One of the things that was weird was watching Nancy Salzman talk about that there's no definition for the word cult. And I was thinking, God, I believed that when I was on the inside, but the thing is, there are numerous definitions of cult, the word cult. They're very, very good definitions. I can post some of them in the show notes. And it was just bizarre to watch that again. And to watch how blind she was in trying to convince us that there was no definition for this thing. It was this amorphous thing used to scare people, maybe like the word hell, for instance, you know. But the thing is, unlike hell, which is kind of amorphous, cults exist, and the definitions are clear. And as I said, I'll post them. There's a moment where Raniere's voice is heard while we're seeing the exterior of the prison he's in, MDC in Brooklyn. And he says something to the effect of, they don't know why I'm really bad, you know, I'm evil. That's what the world thinks. And as I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, motherfucker, we do know why. We do know why the world thinks you're really bad, why the world thinks you're really evil, because you did really bad, evil shit. It was so bizarre, his level of delusion. We know exactly why. Now, when I was on the inside and I believed all the lies, yeah, it was puzzling. Why is the world seeing him this way? Why can't they see who he really is? But like, once you wake up and you realize that's just all bullshit, this guy's doing bad stuff, it changes everything. So I think he still lives in this incredible delusion. Now, one of the things people have been asking me is, so is Raniere just plain evil and he knows he's fucking everybody over, or is he just delusional? And that's a really interesting question. I'm not going to try and answer it now, but I will do an entire episode about that because I have come to some new conclusions that I think are interesting. Watching Mark Agnifolo on screen, man, I have a lot of bitterness there. I have a lot of bad feelings. Mark Agnifolo represented a really bad guy who was doing really bad things. And I think, personally, that Mark Agnifolo was brainwashed. I think that he bought it. When he met his client, Raniere did what he does with pretty much everybody. He spent hours and hours and hours talking to the legal team, and I think he convinced Agnifolo that this was all consensual, that he was a good man, a noble man, a great man, and I think Agnifolo bought it. Which is sad in some ways. Now, how do I say this? How long, though, I wonder, did he cross-examine all of us, still believing that? And at what point did he realize Raniere was a bad man, and he still head-fucked everybody in court? The other thing I noticed was, you know, when Raniere says at the emergency meeting of NXIVM at Silver Bay, at V-Week, the emergency meeting, and by the way, that background that he's sitting in front of, I created that fucking thing. It really just irks me to see that again. But he's talking about how something might come out in the New York Times and that they've had no option to respond, no opportunity, which is absolute fucking bullshit. I know for a fact that the New York Times reached out to them and they apparently didn't say shit. So they did have an opportunity. That is a fucking lie. The other thing that really irked me was when he says, you know, if people knew me, you know, if people really knew me, if they knew the man, the thing is we do know you. Now we know you. You are a liar. You are not a good man. You are not what you represent yourself to be. So there's always this thing with if you look at covert, vulnerable narcissism, the person presents themselves as very humble, very vulnerable. They sort of feel very victimized by the world, and they feel that the world hasn't given them a chance to see who they really are. And what you're seeing when he says that is you're seeing that exact pattern play out. But that man could be extremely aggressive. And when you look at the things he did in terms of litigation, they were seriously aggressive. The fact that he did many of them in a quiet voice doesn't mean that he's good, and doesn't mean those were good things. A person that has behaviors that look like covert narcissism or vulnerable narcissism can do the same thing. I mean, there's, you know, the stories of people that have killed other people, for instance, with very soft-spoken voices is like fucking legendary. So it's good to understand what you're looking at when you hear that soft-spoken voice, that seemingly very sincere attempt to have people understand how really great you are. It's bullshit. It's a Trojan horse. Most of my feeling about watching that emergency meeting was I was just laughing. And I was laughing because it's so apparent that it's complete and utter bullshit. But I spent most of my time laughing. It didn't even make me angry. I was just like, God, this is fucking pathetic. There's a moment when the police show up in Mexico to come and arrest Raniere, and all the DOS women are basically lying and saying that there is no man here. And Loretta specifically lies and says, no, there's no man here. And this was basically, it was like this entire situation was them living out the Jews in the basement metaphor that I've mentioned on other podcasts. There was a particular module called Honesty and Disclosure, and in that module, they talked about the idea like if the Nazis came to your house and there were Jews in the basement that you were hiding, would you just say, be honest and say, oh my God, yes, there's Jews? Of course you wouldn't. You would lie, because that's the ethical thing to do, is to lie. So understand, everybody was trained to lie to law enforcement to protect the leader. So what's going on in that moment with those women is they're literally living, that particular module. Keith is the Jew in the basement, hiding in a fucking closet, which is another story, and they have to protect him. So that was it was fascinating to watch. And there's an episode I did called Holy Deception on YouTube. It's really worth watching. I may put it on the podcast at some point, but I talk about Holy Deception, why cult members lie and why they feel they have to lie and why you can't take what they're saying at face value. They're living in another reality in their mind, and they must lie to you, the outsider. Just back to the closet line, when the policeman said, he was in the closet, the police investigator said he was in the closet. I mean, that was fucking funny. I just laughed my ass off, because the great Vanguard, who had portrayed himself as having, being one of the greatest humans we'd ever seen, ends up hiding in a fucking closet, being protected by Lawrence Salzman. I mean, if that doesn't tell you everything about him, I don't know what does. The other thing that's so sad, it's sort of like watching a train wreck, is in that vertical video, as the cops are putting Raniere in the car, is watching Allison, who just looks dazed. She looks completely and utterly dazed. And that video is another interesting story. I'll talk about it at some point, where I got that video from. That is an interesting story. But anyway, when I got that video, way back in 2018, I remember just looking at Allison thinking, my God, she has no idea what's going on. I think she's utterly confused. And they were about to do their sort of, group blowjob thing with Raniere, as though this was some magical, mystical, important thing to do to uphold honor and nobility in the world, which I still cannot make sense of. I cannot make sense of how a group blowjob does that. But if there's anybody out there that can, let me know. The thing that's touched on a tiny bit, that Agnifolo sort of touches on, is this whole women's empowerment thing. And the con with the women's movement jeunesse, the con was really fucking good. Raniere said that everything in the world, when it comes to women, everything in the world is defined in terms of men. Woman, female. Like, women have not had the opportunity to have their own space, because everything is determined by us men. So what he proposed was that women have their own space. Buildings and rooms that, no man could ever go into, no man could ever set their eyes on. And so that the woman believed that they were building something sacred. And the guys thought it too. They thought, that's great. That's a great idea. Yes, absolutely. Let's build the sacred feminine. But that was the con, because that's not what he was doing. He was trying to get control of their minds. But the on-ramp to jeunesse was this beautiful, beautiful idea that got subverted, as the years went on, and eventually turned into DOS. And it's so sad, because I think that some of the women that are still in there, that still believe, they're still holding on to the con, to the love bombing that they were sold, because it's important to them, and I think it's beautiful. And that's the fucking problem. They're still holding on to something beautiful, and they don't know it has nothing to do with him. They can have that without him. They can have their sacred feminine experience without a fucking man, especially not one like him. Also, watching Agnifolo on camera so many times, gave me a good giggle. Agnifolo, I was aware that Agnifolo was going on camera. I'd heard through the grapevine that he was going on camera. And so when I was in the trial on the stand, when the cross-examination began, Agnifolo's first question was sort of, how long have I been working with HBO and yada, 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 trying to make out as if, because, see, their entire narrative was that I was doing everything I was doing for fame and fortune. Definitely want to let you know there is fucking zero fortune at the moment, and fame not that interested, but I have a lot to say. But Raniere was pushing that, and so Agnifolo was pushing that I'd planned this whole thing for years. This entire thing was in essence fabricated by a few of us, and I was I'd literally embedded myself in the organization for like 12 years to make a film. That's what Agnifolo was pushing. So when the cross-examination was done and the government came back for the redirect, the first question Mark Lesko asked me was I aware if Mark Agnifolo was going on camera for the VOW or not? And I think I said something like, rumor has it, yes. And that completely destroyed the argument. And I thought it was so funny that Agnifolo had been pushing this whole thing. Meanwhile, you can clearly see Agnifolo was interviewed multiple times during that trial. Multiple times. So if anybody was seeking the limelight, I believe it was him. I'm sort of going in order of some of my thoughts, as the episode unfolded. And another thing that I don't think people know, and I don't believe it ever made it. I don't think it made it into the VOW. Is I was thinking about when Allison Mack's mother is on camera, and she's being told by the judge, "Do you understand that you're on the hook for $5 million?" What I think a lot of people don't know, it's in some books. It might be in Catherine's book, actually. Bonnie and myself and Catherine and Tony Natali and a few people were staying in a house in Brooklyn while we were trying to, contact India, get her out and contact a number of different people. And we were, shooting at the same time. And Bonnie and I went into a coffee shop, Joe's Coffee, not far from the courthouse. And as I got my coffee and I was starting to walk to the table where our computers were, I suddenly saw Allison Mack's mother. And I was like, holy shit, that means Allison Mack is somewhere around here. So I don't know if she saw me, but she was just getting up to leave as well. And so I waited for her to leave. Then I walked outside and I kind of walked a little bit behind her and I saw her meet up with Allison, and I think it was India, outside this brownstone. And it was at that moment I realized, holy shit, Allison lives there. Now what's insane is the back of Allison's brownstone looked directly on the back of the townhouse that we were staying in for an entire week. So we were literally in the same block for an entire week, and we didn't know. I think one of the truly brilliant moments in episode 1 is the intercut between, Allison and Keith talking about, if she's on stage and she's rejected by everybody. And it was a really brilliant intercut with the shots of her outside the courthouse going through the gauntlet of press. But what I was noticing again in that conversation with Keith Raniere and Allison Mack, which I shot, by the way, I was noticing how much Allison was constantly flirting with him. And she did that a lot. In fact, Allison did that a lot with pretty much everybody. That was sort of her sort of currency that she used was constant flirtation. And it's such a fucked up scene because he's trying to get her to sort of feel what it feels like to feel desolation. Meanwhile, she's sort of taking it in but flirting at the same time, and then it's being intercut with the experiences she's having outside the courthouse. Truly brilliant, brilliant moment. Another thing I thought was really funny was when Agnifolo said, what did he say? It was quoted in a headline of a newspaper. Agnifolo said that Keith Raniere did not need a cult to get action, and he meant sex. And I thought that was funny because he fucking did. He absolutely did. In fact, in my statement to the court to the judge about Keith Raniere, I actually said that. I'll actually link that in the show notes as well. He absolutely did need that. He did need that level of control to be able to just shtup everybody, I don't think people really wanted to. I think he created a coercive environment where they felt they should, or it was a good thing to shtup him. Now, I want to talk a bit about the Loyalists because somebody had asked me how I felt. Mostly I feel sad. I think that their position on things is so absurd given the amount of information. And in NXIVM, we were always taught to go and get data. Get data, get data, get data. And the thing is, they've basically conveniently deleted so much data that came out in court, and they're holding a position that is absurd and frankly dangerous. And I noticed at one point when Michelle Hatchett was felt outed about being in that restaurant, and she's completely innocent. But the thing is, those DOS women at that point, I believe, were still trying to enroll other women, and I think they probably still are to this day. So it might be dangerous, them still doing the shit they're doing, because Keith Raniere is very capable of running this thing from prison. Just because he's in prison does not mean it doesn't run. I mean, think of the amount of mob bosses and criminals that can do very well from prison. Because if they have enough lieutenants to do their bidding, they can just keep on going. So, and even though he's in prison, I think that he gets fuel from feeling like he still has control, because he does still have control. So, yeah, by and large, I just feel a certain sadness, seeing them. And the other thing that I think is important to notice, and you see it in episode 1, the people that are loyal to Raniere seem to be far more composed than those of us who left. There's a certain composure and control that they have that we don't have. We're a fucking mess. We feel utterly traumatized, and I think it's because they're still holding on to their ideology so tightly, and they've compartmentalized all their different concerns they may have had if they allowed themselves to truly feel and let the walls of decompartmentalization break down. My mouth isn't working this morning yet. If they could let those walls break down, they might feel some of these things, but they have this stoic attitude in a lot of what they're doing. Even if you see them cry and express, they're still very put together compared to the rest of us. And that's because, when you wake up from these things, the level of traumatization is so profound, and your reality is so fucked up that you can't really hold your shit together. So you see us, and we're like, no amazing lighting, no fucking, makeup all the time. And in comparison, the people that are loyal to Raniere are very composed. Anywho, when Moira Penza talks about us against the world, us versus them, she talks about these kinds of organizations. Us against the world is an interesting choice of words, because in the tech, in the education of NXIVM, of ESP, they would say that the us versus them attitude is very bad, that the us against the world is very bad. And they would talk specifically about couples that came in, married couples, people that were just couples but not married. Those people that were bonded, they would say would form a us against the world kind of thing, and that was a very unhealthy bond. Now, what they were trying to do was to break those bonds so that they could form the bonds with each of us individually and break up our relationships and our marriages. So I thought it was very interesting that she brings up that they have this us versus them thing, because they do. In fact, us versus them was supposed to be a bad thing when you're on the inside, but then later on, when Lauren Salzman is questioning Raniere, that's not in this episode, by the way, may not even be in the VOW, she's questioning him about things. She decides after the conversation that maybe us versus them is good, or I think he tries to convince her that us versus them is actually essential. So it was really interesting how they said, don't do that kind of thing on the inside, but as soon as they're under attack, now do that thing. Very, very confusing. I'm very happy to see that in episode 1, and of course in much of the VOW, you can see the complexity of what was going on. Everybody frames this thing as a sex cult. And of course, that's the argument that the Loyalists use as well. It's framed as a sex cult. Yeah, and they're right. It is framed that way. But there was a lot more that was going on And you can see in some of the things that are mentioned, the different practices people were doing, the different educational ideas that were being discussed, that there was a lot more. It was the honey that attracted all of us, deep, deep concepts that we were playing with and mulling over in our minds to try to be, more noble, more ethical, more moral. So there's a lot more than just sex cult. I'm happy to see that and I hope people can see that. I hope that people can look beyond the very lurid headlines, because if you can't, then what's going to happen in the future is you're going to say things like, well, I would never get involved in that because I would never get involved in a sex cult. You wouldn't, because we didn't. That's not what we got involved in. And to simplify it to that degree means you can't actually see the con when it's right in front of you, because the con doesn't start with sex cult. The con ends with that or worse. And I do think, by the way, it would have ended worse had this not been stopped. The moment when Keith Raniere comments from prison that Nancy doesn't understand what it did, her pleading guilty, that it separated the community, there are two things about that. The one is that he constantly was trying to get Nancy to feel responsible for any mistake she made. And this is him still doing it from prison, as though she's somehow responsible for this awful thing that's happened in the world. In fact, when Claire Bronfman, many years before, had complained to her father, who was a very powerful and wealthy man, and her father began coming after Raniere and the organization, Keith Raniere held Claire responsible for that and said that, in essence, she had set civilization back, hundreds if not thousands of years kind of thing. That was the sort of thinking he was using, and it really head fucked her, I think. And so her loyalty may have something to do with her profound sense of guilt, that her complaining to her father and then what her father did to the organization is what set back civilization. And I think she might still believe that. And Raniere's still doing the same thing with Nancy, even from prison. He's still doing the same shit. I want to go back for a second to Agnifolo, when Agnifolo goes to visit Raniere in prison. And the whole way that Agnifolo is talking about Raniere at this point is really that he's a good man, he's a great man. And I think, as I said before, Agnifolo is so deeply fucking brainwashed. It is profound. And that's something, by the way, that we knew even before the trial. We were reading things in the news and we were looking at what Agnifolo was saying in the press, and we realized, like, holy shit, he's buying it. He's totally buying it. He can't see what's going on. It's not like, I don't think it's like he realized this guy was an evil motherfucker and he just wanted to make money. Yes, he wanted to make money, and yes, he made a lot of money from this, Agnifolo did, but I really think he bought it. And I think that during the trial, I think he might have woken up, because he has very little gusto at the end of the trial. He's like a beaten man, Agnifolo, at the end of the trial. He does not have the same vigor that he had at the beginning of the trial. The thing that Agnifolo is doing, he's bought into Keith's victimization. Now, what Keith Raniere is always trying to do is to get everybody to feel sorry for him. And Agnifolo buys into it. And so he's doing the same messaging. The whole scam is, poor Keith, Keith does so much for humanity and he's so maligned. He's a simple, poor man, my God, So I think Agnifolo bought into the victimization and then began being the mouthpiece for Raniere's covert, vulnerable narcissism, which basically is, and all narcissists, by the way, are victims all the time. They're constantly victims. And that's what Raniere was selling. That's what Agnifolo was buying and then selling, with an even bigger platform. Watching the moment in episode 1 where you see all the others abandoning Keith Raniere, just gave me such a sense of like, oh my God, thank God. It's almost like I forgot that we were involved in this thing. And I was watching a TV show and I was like, holy shit, this is great. But I thought back to when it happened, and it was really amazing at the time it happened, because we knew that if they started separating themselves from him, it would weaken his position, but also it would help wake people up on the inside. And it did actually wake a number of people up. Not, of course, the people that are still holding on. But we knew it would do that. He would get weaker and weaker and weaker. And I think what happened is some of them left when they saw the text messages that were talked about in season 1, like the fuck toy type things, or when, some people left when they found out that Raniere got I don't know if I'm allowed to say her name. I'm not sure. Anyway, that woman pregnant, and they weren't going to have the Avatar baby. And then some of them did not want to be associated with, underage porn. And I think that's what separated some of them, because they realized there's no way they should be in bed with that man in court while he's facing those charges. And I think that's what made some of them bail. All right, I can just keep going, but I want to address some people's questions. So I'm going to go over on Twitter and see one question from someone called KK. Do you think Allison Mack was sincere in her breaking off from KR, or did she denounce him to protect herself or perhaps get less jail time? Such an interesting question. I believe that Allison is very morally fluid. I think in the end, she recognized that it would be bad for her. I think she was very loyal, but I think at a certain point, and there's some interesting things that happened. There was a moment that happened. Somebody was at volleyball and relayed this information back to us. There's a moment at volleyball, I think this is in 2000, maybe 18, where Allison's beginning to get concerned about, is what she's doing bad? Because she doesn't think it's bad, but maybe it is bad because people are saying it's bad. And so she goes to Keith at volleyball and she says to him, is what I'm doing bad? And he completely deflects. And allegedly he says, what I need now is a friend, not somebody questioning me. And so, of course, it's one of those thought-stopping statements. It cuts her off at the knees and she doesn't go any further. But she has a moment there when I think she starts to question, is what she's doing bad? I don't know that Allison ever necessarily goes into, oh my God, what I've done is really bad. I think in the end, I imagine her lawyers said you need to separate yourself from this guy. I don't know really what's going on in her head. I only know what I knew of her in ESP. And she doesn't strike me, I don't think she would have changed that much. I think that she made an expedient decision. That's what I think. But again, I can't know. I don't live inside of her. I don't know what it's been like for her in prison. I have no idea. Paige K was asking, what was the most shocking thing that you didn't know already that you learned from the trial? I honestly, 2017 and 2018, I kind of knew most of it. I think the things I didn't know, there's a lot of text messages that I was unaware of, that where Keith was texting some of these women, and it was really juvenile, the shit he was doing. I mean, talking about, semen and, penis size and stuff like that. It was insane. I didn't know about a lot of that stuff because what I did know is that he was constantly on his phone all the time. And it's funny because in making this film about narcissism called Empathy Not Included, my team and I have found that a lot of the people we talk to, the narcissist that in their life is somebody who also spends a lot of time on their phone, constantly texting with like several women sometimes. And so later I realized, oh, that's what he was doing all that time. So seeing some of that stuff come out in court was to some degree shocking. It's that I didn't know about it. And I felt like, my God, if I'd fucking known about it, it would have made all the difference. And speaking of knowing about it, one of the things that Nikki Klein says is she says at some point in episode 1 that, I knew what I was getting into with Keith Raniere. And I was thinking to myself, motherfucker, why didn't you tell us what you were doing? Because if we knew that you and everybody else were stooping him, it would have changed a lot for us. We would have made very, very different decisions. And as I said before, the reason you don't know these things is because there's so much compartmentalization. If you work for the CIA or the NSA, you don't know everything. A lot of it is a need-to-know basis. And unfortunately, this apparently was need-to-know, and most of us did not need to know that she was stooping him, had been for a long time, and many other people were, which begins to explain why, for instance, anytime she wanted to go anywhere, she had to check with him first. And sometimes she'd be invited to do wonderful things outside of Albany, and she couldn't go because he wanted her near him. And I could never figure out, why? Just fucking email, phone call. Now I'm beginning to understand why. I had another thought on that one, but it's not coming back to me, so maybe next episode. Page K continues, what are your thoughts and feelings on Keith Raniere's loyalists who still to this day blame and accuse you and your wife, and Sarah, Nippy, and Catherine, etc., for allegedly ruining the NXIVM community, and who claim all of you lied for your own benefit? Do you agree with the expert in the first episode that said it's easier to blame all of you for exposing Keith's abuses rather than accepting his crimes happened? What are your thoughts? Okay, first of all, I do agree with Diane Benscoter. There is this concept called betrayal blindness that I love, that I think is really important. And betrayal blindness is all about, let's say somebody is abused by an abuser, and somebody in their life comes to try to save them or point out to them what's happening. They will usually get more angry at the person trying to rescue them than at the abuser, because they can't handle the actual betrayal. It's too destabilizing, so it's easier to feel betrayed by the person that's trying to rescue you. So it's a very common concept that I've been, really learning about and studying. So I think that is true. As far as them thinking that we ruined the community, I understand that they think that. I suppose to some degree, we ruined the con. They can still have a wonderful life. They're not in prison. They're out there. They have freedom. Why some of them have freedom, I don't fucking know. And certainly, the Mexicans who were very high up in the inner circle, they just, nothing happened to them. Nothing. So they all have the ability to still have their paradise, their nirvana, their whatever they want. We destroyed a con. It's not the same as what they're suggesting. The NXIVM community was a con. They can still have the good stuff if they don't do illegal shit and abuse other people. As far as his loyalists speaking out, somebody said to me in a social media comment, like, how do you feel about that, them having a platform? Look, I think it's good for people to hear what they're thinking and the way they think. Now, do I think some of them have a batshit crazy approach to life? Absolutely. But I think it's actually good to hear what they're saying, because you can hear the ideology. I don't think the loyalists think that they're doing anything bad. I think they think we're doing bad things, that we and the government are in collusion. That's sort of the story that they're spinning. I think that they believe they have a superior understanding of what it takes to make the world better, and we're just a bunch of weak-willed people that just do not understand what it takes. That's what I think they believe. I want to see if I can say that better. I think hearing the other perspective is important, because you can see coercive control in action. And understand, the loyalists would, listening to what I'm saying right now, they would be saying, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I am absolutely free to do whatever I want. And I know they believe that. But that's not the case. And we will probably always disagree. And look, I'm still holding out hope that some of them will still realize what's going on. I think they just need to study a little more deeply, and they need to be less afraid to let go of their ideological addiction long enough to try on a different perspective, because they're not. They do not want to acknowledge anything that came out in court. All they want to do is try to point out errors in process that they believe happened, and they're fixated on that, as opposed to what Raniere did and what they're still supporting. Willa Rosen on Twitter says, how do you all maintain empathy for those still brainwashed? I think my empathy fluctuates. I have a lot more now than I did during what I call the war. I was very, very angry at them. But I also understand where they're stuck. Personally, I think it's hell. And, maybe they think the same of us, but I think it's hell to be stuck in that place where you're so conditioned that you will die for a criminal. I think it's very, very sad, and I feel really bad for them that they have that perspective. But I don't think we're changing their minds anytime soon at all. And I think mocking them will not change their minds either. I think what mocking them will do is make them hold on tighter. I have a few things on Instagram that I thought were interesting. Oh my God, so many actually. Again, somebody said, what are your thoughts about Keith's prison calls airing on the doc, giving him a voice? Again, I'm not too concerned. I think people need to hear the con. They need to understand that a person that does bad things doesn't necessarily present themselves in a bad way. In fact, quite the opposite. They can be incredibly charming, and they can seem, in his case, very, very noble and vulnerable, et cetera, but their actions are what are important, and I think it's good to see that contrast. Somebody said on Instagram, what do you think Nancy will be saying in the documentary? Lauren Salzman seems to have stayed out of the media. Do you know her story? Yeah, I do know. I know all their stories. I can't say anything. You need to watch the series. I can't be talking about these things. The same person said, Nancy was the first to plead guilty. Do you think that created the chain reaction that followed? I do think that was very helpful, yes. I do think it started that. You know, it's funny. This never showed up in the vow, but there was one morning in LA that Bonnie and I got up, and there were monarch butterflies filling the sky. I mean, the sky was thick with butterflies, and Bonnie said to me, something significant is happening. And then we got the news an hour later that Nancy was pleading guilty. There were a number of moments like that. It's really weird. Moments where nature was doing incredible things and very important events were happening. The day that I went to meet with the FBI in Los Angeles, there were massive fires going on and the sky was red. So I was driving to the FBI office with a red sky. There were just a lot of weird things like that happened. Tracy Dent on Instagram, did Keith's defense ever make you question your reality and what you knew to be true? Yeah, actually, yes. So as I was going, before the trial started, I remember the day that I was going to be on the stand, that morning, I remember saying to Bonnie, what do you think my biggest challenge will be? Because I wanted to know, what is the thing I'm up against? And she sat for a moment in her incredible intuitive way and said to me, Mark Agnifolo is going to be a challenge. And I said, okay, why? And she said, because he is very, very good. He is a formidable actor. And his confidence could shake you. He is so confident, it's going to surprise you. Now, she'd not really seen much of him, and certainly, hadn't been in court seeing him because, it hadn't started yet. And so I went in, and, the first 3 days I was on the stand, it was all the government questioning me. And so I think it was day 4, or maybe day 5, when the cross-examination began, and I only had a few hours on the stand. But in those few hours, Agnifolo came out strong, and he was just relentlessly attacking me. And I had been very well trained at that point, but up to a point, you never know until you're there. And he was so fucking confident. And I had been warned that what a good attorney will do, what a good defense attorney will do, is have you believe that you're the guilty one and their client is innocent. And there was a moment I was like, what the fuck is going on? So when I got off the stand, I felt something sort of lodged in me. Some insecurity lodged in me. And I had the next day off, and I was walking in Brooklyn, having this feeling, and I said to Bonnie, I feel really shaken. I feel like he's got me to question everything. And she said, yeah, that's what I told you he would do. So I had to do a lot of personal work and introspection over that weekend to sort of reorient myself and realize this is exactly what she warned me against, is his confidence was extraordinary. I got I got straight in my head, but it was fucking scary for a moment, because I literally, He literally had me thinking, maybe I am the cause of everything bad that happened here. It was a fucking frightening moment. And understand, I was nervous about going on the stand. It's not so much that I was nervous facing Raniere. What I was terrified of was fucking it up. Like, I felt that it was so important because we all understood if we didn't get this guy, we were fucked forever, because he had hundreds of millions of dollars at his disposal and he would come after us forever. You know, we had to, as you heard Karen Unterreiner say in episode 1, kill the king. You know, you can't just hit the king, you have to kill the king. So my worry was not being a good witness and fucking up somehow and sort of contributing to him not being held accountable. That was my true fear, which is why the Agnifolo thing shook me. It's interesting, you know, we sparred a fair amount, and then the day of the sentencing, I might talk about this a little more in my book, but there was a moment where Agnifolo and I happened to go into the restroom together. What happened is I went into the restroom in court. I was on my own at the urinal, and I heard the door open, and in my mind, something said to me, it's Agnifolo. And Struce fucking God, he walks up next to me at the next urinal over, and it's him. And we start a conversation. But I think I'm going to hold the content of that conversation just for the book. But it was fascinating. Let's say I didn't like him, and I still have some bitterness. I do not understand, and this is a general statement, I do not understand how lawyers, how we as civilians have to go on the stand and basically swear on the Bible that we will tell the truth. And if we don't, we could be held in contempt or put in prison. But lawyers can say any fucking thing they want. Anything. They can lie. They can twist the truth. They can make shit up. No problem. Somebody who's a lawyer needs to explain to me how that works. Because I honestly, no matter what you tell me, I don't think you and I can truly rationalize why that's okay. But hey, not a lawyer. Not a lawyer. All right. Let's see if there's anything else on Instagram. In Australia, so can't see yet, but love to know how you're feeling about reliving this chapter. And don't listen to this. You haven't seen episode 1 yet. But anyway, I'll answer your question. We're not reliving it in the same way, you know. We're in a very different place. There's more of a curiosity. I think that Nippy and Sarah said it well on one of their recent episodes of A Little Bit Culty, seeing what was happening on the inside. Now, as you can see, I had the opportunity to spend time with Karen Unterreiner, who was a very high-ranking member, and she was there for a long time. And the part that unfortunately is not in there is when you're looking at that Excel doc where she's tracking everybody, what you don't hear because it cuts out too early is at one point she says, at a certain point, it got so confusing to try to figure out what you all were doing that we had no idea what was happening. And I said to her, Karen, that was by design. And she was like, what? And I said, it was by design. We designed it to cause maximum confusion. I'm not going to get into how we did it right now, but we had a very specific strategy because we knew they were tracking us. And we knew that if we put certain data into the system, it would create chaos. And it did. And that was something that a friend of mine advised me, who had dealt with many psychopaths. He said, you need to create maximum chaos in their system. And the way you do it is with information that conflicts. And the more information that conflicts, eventually they feel crazy and they don't know what's going on. Which I think actually is something that comes from intelligence, actually. It's an intelligence mechanism. There are a number of times in this episode where you see Jim Del Negro, and Jim has passed away not too long ago, and that truly is very painful for me to watch. I'm sure that Nippy and I will talk about that on their Patreon podcast, but really hurts to see Jim Such a loyal soldier. And I'll talk a little bit more about Jim in the letter to the inside, because I addressed some things to him in that letter. But it's very strange looking at him on screen with the recognition that he no longer exists. You know, he exists for those of us that knew of him, that cared for him, that loved him, but he's gone now. That is a very strange thing. I don't understand death. It just does not make sense to me. You know what? This has been an exhausting episode. I think that watching episode 1 has maybe had a more profound effect on me than I realized. I'm emotionally absolutely exhausted now. So I think it has hit deep. I think, as I said, you know, I processed so much Raniere, but I haven't processed, you know, some of the people that I considered friends for so long. I haven't fully processed, you know, Nancy and Lauren and some of the people that are in DOS, still loyal to DOS. And some of these people are people that I care about very, very deeply. And I think there are a lot of wounds still. And I think that now that I'm, you know, sitting here a few hours after watching it, I'm starting to feel some of the wounds that I wasn't aware of. So I have a feeling I'm going to have an extremely good nap today, and I might have an emotional hangover. But this is my plan, is the day after, if possible, or maybe 48 hours after, is to record my thoughts, my debrief. That was what they used to call it, you know, when you did question sets in Nixium and then you heard the trainer speak. It was called a debrief. Then later they called it a disquisition, which I hated that word. But that's my plan, to debrief on these episodes. As I said, I'll be talking to Sarah Nippy over in a little bit Culty or perhaps their Patreon. I hope you're getting a lot out of this. There's a lot of information that is not on screen, a lot of information that you know, never made it into the press. I think it's valuable as well for those of you who have access to read the court transcripts, because there's some staggering shit that happened. And if you read the court transcripts, it'll blow your fucking mind. And finally, do me a favor, subscribe to my podcast, you know, and give me good ratings as much as you can. It helps because, as I said on one of my episodes, you know, I do have enemies. They are going to try and rate me low. So everything you can do would help. And finally, I want to thank all of you that have sent such incredible messages of support on social media, private messages. It means the world to us. I think I speak for all the whistleblowers that your messages really touch us very deeply and have done some great things to our hearts that were quite hurt. And we are experiencing a resurgence of a belief in humanity because of you. So thank you so much, and we will talk soon.